Hi everyone, how are we doing? Joe here from Orbis Connect. Welcome to our panel talk today, which is in collaboration with the guys over at the Site Reliability Engineering London group. So the guys over there, Jai Campbell and Nishay Goyal, helped us out today in putting this together. So shout out to them first of all. So today, we're going to be talking about SRE, DevOps, and how they fit together. So we'll be looking at the core principles of each discipline, how they're defined in the industry. So I think most of us might see these two areas as merging within organisations at the moment. Others will see them sort of definitively separate. One thing's for sure that it's quite a hot topic at the moment. I think we can all agree on that. So to discuss all these points and more, we've got a great panel lined up for you today. First off, we'll be speaking with Mark Andrew, who's DevOps Manager over at AdStream. Mark's going to give us, first of all, a short presentation on how SRE and DevOps relate as company cultures. Also, how they're seen as job titles, so SRE engineers versus DevOps engineers. Then we'll be speaking to Rupert Willard. Rupert is the Global Head of Applications, Infrastructure, SRE and Ops at Morgan Stanley, bit of a mouthful. And he's going to be talking to us again, another short presentation about why we need SRE. And last but by no means least, we're going to be speaking with Ron DeGeorge, who is Head of Reliability Engineering at Direct Line Group. Ron's going to be talking us through SLAs, SLOs, SLIs, and working collaboratively. So really, really exciting talk coming up at the end. So each presentation from the guys will be around 5 to 10 minutes each. Then we're going to have an open Q&A panel discussion at the end, where hopefully we'll get some interesting debates going, and which is where you guys come in. So if you're watching on Crowdcast, join in the chat on the side. I think it's that way as you're looking, and vote in the polls. We've got some polls set up below. If you can get involved in those, it's just really good to get an understanding of where people see it at the moment. So do get involved in those. And if you've got a question for any of our panelists, or you just want to put it to the whole panel, and get that down below as well. So you should see a ask a question button below. So just use that, and we'll try and get around to as many questions as we can. If you're watching on LinkedIn, give us a like, a thumbs up, and pop any questions you've got in the comments, and we'll get round to those as well, hopefully, depending on how much time we have. We're going to try and keep it between an hour, maybe an hour and 30 minutes, depending on how many questions we've got coming in. But yeah, so it should be really good. So stick around, and let's kick off. So I'm going to get Mark on screen. If you all just bear with me 1 second. So fingers crossed, Mark will pop up any minute now. So yeah, get involved in the polls, guys. At the moment, first one, will DevOps engineer as a job title disappear? No, most people saying at the moment. Mark, hello, how are you?
Hello, I'm good. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, can hear you fine, see you fine. Thanks for joining us today.
No problem. I'm glad to be here. I'm looking forward to it.
Good. Mark, just for the benefit of the audience, people that don't necessarily know you, can you give us a quick background on yourself?
So yeah, my name's Mark Andrew. I work for a company called AdStream currently as their DevOps manager. Before that, I did 5 years at Sky, and I managed DevOps and reliability engineering teams at Sky, as well as other software functions. And I've been in sort of TV, media, IT for 15, 20 years, long time anyway. Yeah, that's me.
Cool. And a quick overview about what your short presentation is going to be on. I mentioned it briefly earlier.
So the sort of brief was how do SRE and DevOps fit together. I've taken it from two angles. It's how does SRE and DevOps culture fit together, and how do SRE engineers and DevOps engineers, how do they sort of work together, if they do or should they, that sort of thing. So it's a kind of culture-based presentation.
Cool. Well, I'll let you have the floor. I'm going to take myself away. When you're done, Mark, just let me know, and I'll come back on.
I will do it. Here we go. So yes, hello. As I said, my name is Mark Andrew, and I manage the DevOps team at a company called AdStream. So how do SRE and DevOps fit together. So as I said in the little introduction, I'm looking at this from two different angles. So in the first angle, how do SRE and DevOps culture fit together? So DevOps culture means a lot of things to a lot of different people. If you ask 10 technology professionals what DevOps is, you'll get like 15 answers. So a brief definition that I like to use: DevOps culture, within it, you automate everything, you monitor and measure everything, you implement frequent gradual changes, you accept and plan for failure, and importantly, you communicate and you collaborate across the technology department and also outside. So I've lined up these sort of DevOps culture points against some of the commonly accepted SRE principles. And as you can see, they fit together quite nicely. So for automate everything in DevOps, you have the important SRE principle of eliminating toil. In DevOps, you need to measure everything to find out if your changes are successful. And a key SRE principle is the creation and management of successful monitoring and alerting. In SRE, you embrace risk, and I believe that's what enables you in a sort of DevOps culture to release frequently. You do small changes, and there's a known risk with those changes, and you sort of embrace that risk. DevOps should accept and plan for failure, and SREs, SLIs, and SLOs allow you to track that, and blameless postmortems are done after failures. And I think the blameless part is a key indicator of acceptance that failures can and do happen. And finally, collaboration is a major part of the DevOps culture, and SREs have that shared responsibility with the development teams. So in Google's SRE Bible, they themselves say one could view DevOps as a generalization of core SRE principles. So we should expect them to align somewhat. The way I see it, SREs are DevOps practitioners, and they champion a DevOps culture as part of their regular duties. So I think that's sort of one way they fit together. So then thinking of the sort of second thrust of my presentation, how do SREs, as in the job function SRE, how do they fit together with DevOps engineers? Now, I don't necessarily think they should. So let me explain myself a little bit. So if you look at how DevOps is defined across the board, it's most frequently defined as a methodology. So in many ways, I don't think DevOps engineer should really be a job title. When properly implemented, DevOps is the environment in which all software engineers work. It's essentially the air that they breathe. So it doesn't make sense to have that as an engineering job. Across the industry, DevOps job titles themselves vary tremendously from company to company. It's an ambiguous job title. Some places, it's devs that do a bit of ops. Some places have renamed their sysadmins. And some places, DevOps engineers are, in reality, are doing an SRE role just by a different name. And then there's companies where you find that DevOps and SREs work together. And then that sort of work together as a long-term thing and not just as a migration strategy. So I'm of the opinion you need to be very careful that an anti-pattern doesn't develop, because due to the nature of the separation of both roles, you could get back to the old days of throwing code over the fence. So essentially in the bad old days, it was devs throwing code over to ops. And if you're not careful, you could easily replicate that. So you've got DevOps looking after non-production, and then they throw over the fence to SREs who are looking after production. So I think very careful you have to be if you've got them working together. So my belief is that DevOps engineers should really exist in a transitional space to get an organization's culture and its tools in place. A properly, fully implemented DevOps culture should really have no need for DevOps engineers. So when you've got devs owning their own code in production, when devs are on call, i.e. when they build it, they own it. When you've got all your deployments done fully through CI/CD, and when DevOps KPIs are being measured, publicized, and improved upon, then your company's fully embraced the DevOps culture, and there's really no need for DevOps engineers anymore. The next step really can be found in the SRE land of SLIs, SLOs, and importantly, enforceable error budgets. So just as in my mind, DevOps finished what Agile started, I see reliability engineering builds upon and continues DevOps and improves upon it. So that's how I see them fitting together. I think if you're still in that transitional phase where you're still moving to the cloud and you're moving to DevOps culture and you're moving to DevOps tools, you can have DevOps and SREs working together. You can have the sort of cultures and the principles being implemented in tandem, but again, you have to be very careful how they work together, and you don't get that anti-pattern developing. So in short, I think SREs implement, champion, and work within a DevOps culture, and DevOps is more a methodology and an engineering culture than an actual job title. So that's me. So thanks everyone for listening to me for 5 minutes. You can take over my screen now.
Amazing, thanks Mark, appreciate that. Really interesting point of views actually. One thing you mentioned actually is DevOps engineer as a job title. Do you see that? We've actually got that on one of our polls, and I'll check that in a minute. Do you see that as a job title becoming redundant in the future then?
Redundant's a horrible word, but
probably,
I think you'll see it slip away, especially as, I mean, everything's cloud native now, and everybody's cloud native and everything's built for the cloud, and I think it's a transitional thing. It was to get the old world out of the way and to sort of usher in this new world. So you'll still have it, I think, for old organizations, but the way I see it, it's kind of like the agile coach. You bring in an expert to sort of implement this, and sort of a consultant type thing to come in, look at this old way of doing things, tell you how you should be doing it, and then what tools you should be using, and then they just go, because But I think the main struggle is the culture from the not within the sort of DevOps space, but the wider culture within a company, because everybody does DevOps, But then, like I said, you look at the job titles and there's 100 different job titles and they're all doing different things. The real DevOps is when the entire company buys into it, and it does, like I said in my presentation, it becomes the air you breathe within software engineering. Because being a DevOps engineer is a thing, and you have your place, but now software developers are DevOps engineers as well, and it's needs to be across the board, and it needs to be a way of thinking. And I think if you haven't done that, then it's even harder to get to SRE, because it's, as well as a job title, it's a culture as well, and it has all its own engineering principles, and it has all its own things that the entire company needs to buy into and do.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, good answer. Interesting point. So based on that, it's a good time to check the polls actually. So one of which, will DevOps engineer as a job title disappear eventually? Almost 65% of the votes say no, which is interesting. Another one of the polls, does your organisation generally understand what SRE is? Over half of people have said getting there, which is interesting. And the last one, how does SRE and DevOps fit together? Almost 70% of people have said SRE embodies DevOps. Interesting again. So keep your votes coming in on the polls, guys, if you haven't already. We'll check back on those as we go along. Mark, thank you very much for your presentation. We'll get you back on screen after we've had Rupert and Ron on for the panel discussion at the end.
Okay, thank you. Cheers.
Cheers, Mark. Speak to you soon. Okay, right. Now, it's time for Rupert. I'm just going to get Rupert on now. We've got quite a lot of viewers, so I've just got to try and find Rupert's user. Right, I've got him now. Okay, yeah. So while I wait for Rupert, guys, just remember, get your questions in below. We've had a few coming in already, so get them in, and we'll get round to them at the end. Rupert, hello.
Hi everybody.
How are you?
I'm very good, thanks. Excited about this.
Yeah, good. Excited to have you. Thanks for joining us. Just again, for the benefit of everyone tuning in, can you give us a little bit of background on yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I work at Morgan Stanley. I run the SRE and Ops for the application infrastructure organization, but I'm relatively new to SRE for sure. Started that journey maybe 3 years ago. But I've been at Morgan Stanley 20 years, and I've done all sorts of different roles, including product management. We don't do that anymore, really. We've got product owners, and program management. Remember when we used to have program managers? I did Windows NTT to Windows XP migration for a large chunk of the firm, stuff like that. I've run command centers. I've done all sorts of stuff. So what I found is that varied background has helped me, really get my head around what does SRE mean and what's the value it can deliver to our organization.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, again, Rupert's going to give us a short sort of 5-10 minute presentation. So yeah, floor's over to you, Rupert. Just let me know what you've done, and I'll come back on.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen now.
Yeah.
And there it is. So yeah, I know Joe was sort of joking about the length of my job title. Obviously, the longer the job title, the more important you are. But if you think that's a mouthful, then check this out. I read somewhere that feature developers convert a business hypothesis into a technology-enabled service, delivering value. So I don't know about you, but I think that just means that developers gravitate towards shiny new things. And why not? We need them to innovate for the benefit of our organization. But thinking back, how much time did they have left, to care for ops? And over in ops, Mark was saying, in fact, how the old days when developers would just chuck code over the fence. Well, ops, just didn't have control over the flow of their work. And more than that, they didn't have the skill mix to make their own jobs better for the benefit of the product. And yes, the feature developers would help, but only when they have more time. And they never have more time. So the ops work becomes uninspiring and manual. The operational skills and innovation absolutely fades. And that ultimately means that we get increased escalations into the feature delivery teams. And that slows them down. They have even less time to pay down the technical debt. And both dev and ops roles alike start to feel like a very hard way to make an easy living. And we need to break that cycle. So let's fast forward to DevOps. An organizational culture, I would say, it emphasizes automation and faster delivery while simultaneously improving quality. And I know Mark was describing it just now as a methodology. For me, it almost feels like a mythology for some teams. But in any event, it's not just the developer productivity and the continuous delivery that we should care about. It's also improving the way products are actually operated on the ground. And in a DevOps world, who automates away all of this? The feature developers will prioritize technical debt, generally speaking, that impacts their developer productivity, not so much the ops productivity. And anyway, who says that feature developers are the experts of product operations, of observability and things like that? It's not their day job. And, so why should it be? So I say it's time for a new role within DevOps, and let's call it site reliability engineering, a role that's dedicated to maximizing product reliability and making ops more efficient. That means managing down technical debts, developing operational tools, automating away work. So it basically defines how products should be operated by the rest of the team. And I say that has to be within the specification of the product owner, because we can't chase 100% reliability. We can't manage down costs so much that customers are dissatisfied with operational responses, request fulfillment and whatnot. Now, DevOps says to integrate dev with ops. SREs are both operational and they're developers too. And sometimes they are infrastructure engineers. The point is that they are skilled, competent peers of feature developers. I think at this point, I should say we must not alienate incumbent ops staff. There is absolutely an opportunity for them to contribute to the SRE effort. And I've got pictured here door seals at Land Rover. They're stored under a heat lamp to make them more malleable for faster installation. And who thought of that? Was it the vehicle designer? I don't think so. That was somebody on or very close to the production line who thought of that. And another point is we must give incumbent ops staff the opportunity to upskill. Now, we have a DevOps fleet lead at Morgan Stanley called Trevops Brosnan, and he's got 8 DevOps principles or Trevorisms, and this is one of them. Unreleased code is the opposite of wine. So, right, we know DevOps says to enable frequent delivery. SREs can advocate smaller changes and more frequent changes to what may be a cautious sort of client group, user group. They can ensure that cabs are for advisory only, not for approval. That is, if you need cabs at all these days. And SREs can introduce version control in config and tools and all of that for faster rollback. SREs can help feature developers incorporate observability at the build stage, not retrofitting the tracing hooks and app metrics and all that. And SREs can introduce measurements like SLOs and MTTR. DevOps says automation. Sure, SREs automate away work, particularly repetitive or risky operational tasks. And also, we're not done until features are running successfully in prod. So SREs would not accept failure, would accept failure as normal, I apologize, and help feature developers to build in predictable breaking points like in a chocolate bar, and also plan for more catastrophic failures like the one we can see on screen here, and then learn from those failures. So if we have at least one SRE in every squad, it follows a DevOps principle to break down organizational barriers. It puts an operational expert inside. I think I'm saying SRE provides an actionable definition of how to achieve key aspects of the DevOps philosophy. So when it comes to operating complex systems, I'm saying if DevOps is the sausage, SRE is the sizzle. Let's put an SRE in every squad. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that, Rupert. And I love the metaphors there, especially the sausage one. So just on that, you made a few interesting points. So are you saying that SRE activities should just be part of the sort of day job for every DevOps engineer?
Well, you could say that, but the problem, if you treat it that way, is the other responsibilities can get in the way. And it's better if you can define somebody, at least one person, where it's absolutely their day job to contribute to reliability and operational efficiency. Not only does that ensure that the work gets done, but then they can also really specialize in that as a subject. And that in itself will make the product, simply more sophisticated in the way it's observed and the simplicity with which it can be operated.
Yeah, cool. Understand. Yeah, thanks for that, Rupert. Like I say, again, we'll get you back on at the end for the panel discussion. So, yeah, thanks again. I'll speak to you shortly. Right, cool. So, last but by no means least, I'm going to get Ron on screen. So guys, just with the questions, if you got any questions that you want me to put to the panel, if you can try and put them in the question tab below if you're on Crowdcast as opposed to the chat bar, so I can try and keep an eye on them a bit easier then. Ron, hello.
Hello, how are you, Joe?
Very well, thank you. How are you? I'm
doing well, thanks. Really excited to talk today.
Yeah, well, thank you for joining us. And yeah, thanks for being patient. Save the best till last, I'm sure you'll say.
No pressure, huh?
Yeah, no pressure, exactly. So yeah, just for the benefit of our viewers, Ron, can you give us a short background on yourself?
Sure. So my name is Ron DeGeorge, for those of you who don't know me. I've been in IT for 3 decades as of this month, which has been absolutely fantastic. I've worked in various industry. Thank you very much. Why not spend it this way with everyone here?
Exactly.
So yeah, so it's been 3 decades. The last decade, I've been working primarily on a reliability engineering focused teams and helping them grow and building those out. And of course, that's quite a tall order. But I guess the best way to summarize me is I'm a customer centric and even engineering centric focused leader who's cross functional.
Excellent. So yeah, again, Ron, you're going to give us a short 5-10 minute presentation before we kick off with the panel discussion. And guys, just a reminder of the poll, get involved in them. Not much change actually, just to touch on them. Still, most people, or 65% of people think that DevOps engineer won't disappear as a job title. I think does your organization generally understand what SRE is? No, and getting there is quite even. There's only 15% of people that said yes to that question, which is interesting. I think that says a lot, actually. How does SRE and DevOps fit together? Again, yeah, still the same. 65% of people think that SRE embodies DevOps. A few people still not sure. Well, hopefully today, after the panel discussion, that can change. So, Ron, floor is yours.
Fantastic. All right, fantastic. Thanks again for joining us today, everyone. It's been an absolute pleasure so far to hear Mark and Rupert speak. I'll try to live up to that standard. My name is Ron DeGeorge. I'm the head of reliability engineering at the Direct Line. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Today at today's SRE and DevOps event, I'll be speaking towards site reliability engineering and more specifically focused on a data-driven approach to realizing DevOps best practices. So let's get stuck in. So I think the best way to kind of kick things off is let's just talk about some foundational stuff. So what is site reliability engineering, or SRE as it's called? Well, if anyone starts hunting around the internet, they'll soon find that the word or acronym DevOps seems to pop up quite frequently alongside SRE. So I think the best way to do this and tackle this is, hey, let's talk about DevOps first. And if you start doing a bit more Googling and searching around the internet, you'll probably come across Wikipedia's version of the acronym, which is DevOps is a set of practices that combines software development, or arguably the dev, and IT operations, which is obviously the ops, and henceforth the acronym DevOps. And that sounds really nice. And then we start looking a little bit deeper, and then we start talking about site reliability engineering. So in practice, in my opinion, site reliability engineers combine software and systems engineering disciplines to build and run large-scale fault-tolerant systems that users' overall happiness with features, service, and performance is optimized. So really what I'm trying to say here is site reliability engineers implement DevOps practices and steer with data. So this sounds all cool and everything, and it's very easy to kind of throw across in an elevator pitch. But let's take a look at how this works in practice. So the first step of 3, in my opinion, is to know your data. So we often hear these terms, SLAs, SLOs, and SLIs. And really, what we're looking to see is well-defined SLAs that are customer-centric and outlines what happens when SLAs are breached, or arguably what happens when the customers experience some level of pain. And they're typically business-focused, driven from the business, and again, very customer-centric. On the other side of the fence, we have the engineers. And the engineers arguably know their SLIs or service level indicators extremely well. But what we have to make sure is that SLIs have the capability to measure the success or the breaches or learnings of SLAs. And then comes in one of the sweet spots for SRE, which is the SLOs. And SLOs are the binding link between SLIs and SLAs. And what they do is they make sure that everyone's focused on the right data. So one of the key things to call out here is SLOs should always be tighter than the SLAs, because you want to make sure that the customer experience is always as optimal as possible, especially with an SRE hat on. So in summary, SLAs, SLOs, and SLIs ensure that everyone in the business is focusing on the right data. So let's talk about some tools. Step 2. So we have to make sure that we get the right tools for the right jobs. There's lots of tools out there. But really what we want to think about is only implementing the tools that have the capability to measure the success or breaches of SLAs. And you really want to mitigate flying blind situations by implementing mechanized or automated procedures that assist engineers in managing tooling failures, especially during large-scale events. And of course, you want to ensure that the SLAs themselves the tooling themselves have SLAs that are in line with the business's needs. You really want to treat all your tooling, especially from an observability perspective, as your core services or products, and have them lined up with P1 and P2 type situations when they don't work. And of course, one of the key things that a lot of us engineers, we forget is all tools incur cost, regardless of their commercial offerings or if they're open source. And really the focus here is not about the tools themselves or how awesome they are. They're all very awesome in their own right. We want to make sure that the tools themselves will help the business meet its SLA needs. So really, we want to make sure that we select the right tools to help us meet the business needs and exceed its SLAs. Step 3, we have to apply our learnings. And we often hear this term or terms of 50% of our time will be focused on the build and 50% of our time will be focused on the run in site reliability engineering land. And when we focus on the run, we should expect failures. And we should learn from every event and apply learnings to mitigate reoccurrence. And of course, we don't want any engineer to kind of go into battle without the right tools. So we should implement the run books that are iteratively improved to assist the engineers, all of the engineers across the organization, to help them and support them in managing events to resolution. And arguably, looking towards mitigating reoccurrence through exercises such as blameless postmortems, or root cause analysis procedures, or major incident reviews. And of course, that's only one part of our learnings. The other part of our learning is actually forcing things to not go to plan, or arguably scheduling and routine FMEA exercises into our build time to identify potential failure modes in our systems, their causes and effects, and to mitigate them from reoccurring through enhancements and system enhancements and automation. And really what it's all about is using data collected from every event and exercise to apply learnings quickly, measurably, and to measurably improve the customer experience, because arguably that's what it's all about. So let's put it all together and just kind of recap what we've talked about today. Step 1, we have to know our data, our SLOs, our SLIs, and our SLAs. We have to get the right tools and implement the right tools that actually can realize those metrics that we've decided in step 1. The right monitoring, alerting, dashboards, tracing, observability, level down to the customer experience views, as well as log aggregation and alerting on that front as well. And then we have to put these tools to work and we have to apply our learnings. And arguably, swinging back, site reliability engineers, they embody DevOps practices.
I think you might have muted there, Mark. I'm not too sure if that's Ron. Sorry, I don't know if that's just my my computer, but yeah, I can't actually hear you at the moment. Can you hear me, Mark? Ron? Okay, yeah. Sorry, Ron. I can't hear you. Can you hear me? Okay, Ron. I'll take that as a no. Right, what we're going to do. I think we got the most of that anyway. We can't hear you, Ron. What I'll do is I'll take.
There we are. There you are. Can you hear me now, Joe?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah, not too sure what happened there. We heard everything. Not to worry. So yeah, again, thanks for
Fantastic.
that, Ron. Yeah, I guess quick question from me actually, in terms of the when setting out on your SLAs, SLOs, SLIs, I think you've mentioned it in your recap at the end there in terms of preparing. Is that very important in terms of prepping and planning and knowing your data?
Absolutely. I mean, if you try to do it in reverse order or differing order, you'll find that you'll have varying degrees of success or arguably no success at all. So you have to know your numbers. You have to start off with the numbers. And one of the key things about the SLAs are it's important to have engineering folks inside sitting talking at the same table as the business folks.
Yeah.
So that way the SLAs that are agreed upon are actually measurable as compared to something that sounds pretty awesome. However, in reality is not really measurable in today's technology. So you're not going to go very far with it.
Yeah, of course. Cool. Right, okay, so we're going to get straight into the panel talk now. So if you haven't already, guys, get your questions in below. or if you're on LinkedIn, get them in the comments. We'll try and get around to as many as we can. And although I do encourage some good debate between our three panelists. Okay, cool. So just going to get the other guys on. Quite a few questions coming in already, which is good. Welcome back, Rupert.
Thank you.
And just waiting for Mark to connect.
Hello.
Hello, Mark. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So just make sure it's not echoing too much. Cool. So just a few questions then, I guess. This is for everyone. So when establishing SRE, what's the most important skill? Is it development, engineering, or product/business knowledge? Let's come to Mark first for that.
When establishing SRE, it sounds like a cop-out of an answer, but you need it all, I think, especially when you're talking about these SLIs, SLOs, and SLAs. You need somebody who knows the business and knows how it all fits together, as well as the technical skills. So yeah, I think you want the perfect package. You want somebody who's got them all. So yeah, a bit of a cop-out answer, but
on the fence with that one, Mark. Okay, yeah. Cool. Rupert?
Well, I think if you can find someone who's got it all, the business and product knowledge, the software engineering, the infrastructure engineering, then you're going to have to pay them a lot of money, and they're probably worth it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, finding those is too difficult. And I think the answer to this might be that, although you do need a combination, I can't disagree with Mark. If you're just starting, where are you feeling the most pain? Where do you have the biggest gap? So sometimes it's because a dev team, you're totally reliant on a dev team for all the automation. So really you need a developer as an SRE. In other times, you're feeling pain through the complexity of your infrastructure that needs rationalizing, or the cost of it, or something like that, then you'll gravitate towards infrastructure engineering. Me personally, when I was starting, I had an abundance of quality infrastructure engineering. I was very short on development. And some of those upskilled, and some we kind of brought in through mobility transfer and hiring. But the short answer is just start with where you're feeling the most pain.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. So obviously, if you're working within a wider team and you've already got someone that's stronger on the development side, then potentially look for someone that's got that product knowledge or business knowledge.
Try and get to what Mark's saying, which is that full-rounded capability.
Yeah, exactly. Ron, anything to add on that?
I think Mark and Rupert have done a great job of highlighting some key points. I think, I agree, SREs are generalists and a master of a few skill sets. And those skill sets could be, business related or engineering focused. I think Rupert's also touched upon a key point here. It's about identifying the problem that you're trying to fix, right? Once you've identified the problems, then you can start to theme those problems together. And you can get a feeling as to like, hey, out of all of this noise, what are the themed problems that we're going to tackle first? And then you can prioritize those. And then you can work backwards from that and actually, get the right skills in-house to do the job, so to say.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, guys. All right, so let's go into the audience questions. We have a question here. Has anyone managed to balance you build it, you own it, and segregation of duties? It's quite a few votes on that one, actually, from various audience members. Do you want to kick us off on that one, Rupert?
Yeah, I was commenting in that if you have a rock star developer, why on earth would you saddle them with owning everything they build? Instead, you want to sort of parachute them into as many products and projects as possible over time. But the principle here is more, building something that can be sustained, as opposed to too expensive to maintain, something that will wither. And so certainly at least feeling the burn at in the early life cycle is a good way to ensure that feature developers have a better understanding of their responsibilities, really, to launch products that are supportable. And we were even discussing at my places, maybe for some of these more enduring products that don't have a lot of ongoing feature development anymore, kind of keep the light on type products, maybe they should be owned by SREs rather than owned by the traditional product owner dev team groups. So it's definitely something that we're wrestling with.
Yeah, okay, thanks for that. Ron, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think this is a common thing. I mean, one of the things we have to kind of step back from is kind of diving right in. I think we have to think about what the problem is that we're trying to solve here. And once we step back and look at that, we say, okay, fine. We're trying to get to a place where we're arguably automating ourselves out of a job. And the reason for that is because as soon as we start to get our heads around that, and we do the 50% own it and 50% run it approach, we start to be able to actually do more with less, that old saying that we've heard for decades now. Because the truth is, as engineers, we also want to do fun things, right? You don't want to do the same old thing every day and day in and day out, right? So the sooner we take that approach of 50-50, we can actually realize that. And something that's interesting that happens is, I've often seen it where it's a journey, where I start into a new role or a position, or something happens where I'm taking on a new challenge in the existing company. And it's typically, I start to see that as more of a 100% reactive start off. And my initial thing is around getting the culture and the engineering skill set towards that 50-50. And at some point, in a magical point in time, and it does happen, you get to a place where you're actually more proactive than you're reactive. And that basically is the green light to say, hey, this team is ready to take on some more services, or arguably take on some more engineering challenges. And hey, that's what it's all about, right? Having a bit of fun, engineering some cool stuff.
Yeah, very good point. Mark, anything to add on that?
I just wanted to go back to Rupert's earlier comment about saddling a rockstar developer with responsibilities like that, and parachuting them into other teams. The way I see it is, when you build it, you own it. I don't see it as an individual thing. It is like a team thing. So you could have that rockstar developer who comes in, builds this awesome thing, supports it while it's in its early days, and then hands that off to the team that will own it for a good chunk of its lifespan, and then he moves on to his next project. But I think it is just about somebody who knows the application or the service needs to sort of own it in production. And going back again to what you said, they need to feel the pain, because I've been in support teams where, in that old way where devs just throw code over and it completely breaks production at 2 o'clock in the morning. And then everyone has a lessons learned, and then you get 2 months later, you go through the same thing because devs were not feeling the pain. So I think you definitely need them to feel some pain.
Fair enough. Okay, cool. We're getting loads of questions coming in, so I'm just going to quickly move on to the next one. So I've got a question here, I think it's from Mark Long. What impact does the SRE and DevOps team have on the culture of a wider product engineering organization? Ron, should we start with you on that one?
Sure. So that's a multifaceted question. A very good question, Mark. Thanks.
Yeah.
So I think there's a couple of things you have to think about. Is there's multiple implementations of an SRE organization, and that can kind of work to different guises. And you have to, again, know your problem space. But arguably, the more common implementations that we see nowadays are the SRE organizational approach, where it becomes a bunch of engineers that are SRE focused, or SREs themselves, to be better put, and they're able to take on services and products and manage them and continue with the run, as well as all the new integrations that come along the path. That's definitely one model that's quite popular nowadays. The other one that seems to be quite popular as well is the embedded model. And the embedded model is where you have a business unit focus, where you say, well, this team of technical engineers, as well as technical product owners and technical program managers, work together in one squad and focus on providing a great service or product. And that's another quite popular one. And the one that I'm also seeing, which is a bit more niche, but it's starting to kind of build up steam, I guess, as it were, is the consultancy approach, where there's a a team of site reliability engineers that are seen as consultants. And not too far from what Rupert was saying is that you parachute them in to embed the SRE practices and realities of the world, to kind of get them to a place where they're quite agile and be able to kind of measure success and learnings. So I think my preference is the latter two, to be quite frank. That they seem to work really, really well. And I think, coming back to Mark Long's question, I think for the way that question was worded, I think, the embedded model would probably be arguably the better approach to kind of drive a solution for that.
Yeah, I guess it varies as well, depending on the sort of senior management or stakeholders in terms of their level of buy-in. I think Mark actually mentioned it briefly in his presentation about dealing with the sort of senior business managers, whether that may be. So I guess that varies dependent on each company. Would you agree, Mark?
Yeah, so I think the question's almost backwards, because it's saying how does DevOps and SRE influence the wider business culture, but I think the wider business culture needs to be a DevOps culture, because if it's not, then you've hamstrung them from the start. Especially, I think an important thing for SRE is that enforceable error budgets. I think if they don't have that stick to beat people with, then it's very hard for them to have an impact on the overall engineering culture. So I think that's what I think the question's a little bit backwards. It needs to be a DevOps SRE culture from the start, rather than from the ground up trying to sort of impact outwards.
Yeah, interesting point. Thanks for that, Mark. Rupert?
Well, it could be a long-standing engineering organization that actually would benefit the most from these changes, but potentially resistant to that change. And so, as the rest of the organization, encloses around them with a DevOps culture, and they start to see the measurement, and they start to really see that it doesn't matter how much they've engineered and how innovative they are, if nobody's using it, it's not running successfully, reliably, securely in production, as Trevor Brosnan would say, you haven't actually achieved anything, unfortunately. Sure, okay, experimentation is always good, but I mean, in terms of actual product delivery. So this could be, where we're saying things like SRE and DevOps cultures can have a very positive impact on something like an engineering organization.
Yeah, completely. Good points there from all three guys. Thanks for that. Moving on, you mentioned toil. Can you expand on how you see SREs reducing their toil? I think that actually might be aimed at Mark. Was that toil you mentioned, Mark, in your?
Yeah, I mentioned it as one of the important things that SREs do. What was the? Sorry, can you just restate the question?
Yeah. Can you expand on how you see SREs reducing their toil?
So I think from the Google definition of SRE, and from I imagine how other people implement it, it's just a key part of the day-to-day work. Every organization has a bunch of things that need to be done, that might be done manually or might be done really inefficiently. It will vary depending on where you are and what the company's sort of priorities are. But yeah, from an SRE point of view, and even from a DevOps point of view, you have to just automate away as much of that as possible, and you have to reduce it, whatever it might be. There's still companies where they're manually granting access to certain resources and things like that, and somebody spending an hour every morning updating permissions. That's the sort of thing that a good DevOps or a good SRE would look at and just go, "This is crazy. Why am I doing this? There is a better way." So I think, to answer the question, toil will vary depending on the organization, and a good DevOps or a good SRE will always have a nose for what it is and how to get rid of it.
So is there certain automation tools that can help with that?
Oh, the tools, yeah. So I mean, you've got all just your standard things. You can you've got scripting, you've got Python, your Ansible, very good for that sort of thing. I mean, even you could look at provisioning infrastructure as toil if you're doing it manually, and then you would move to infrastructure as code. Some sort of implementation is that. So it just depends where you are in your journey and what you would then consider toil.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I'm going to move on to the next one. Unless Rupert, Ron, you got anything to say on that?
Well,
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Rupert, you go ahead.
well,
Oh,
okay. I
Rupert.
just wanted to flag that this is critical. If you want to establish SRE in the first place in a way, and you get this chicken and egg problem, we managed to automate and eliminate 66% of our alert handling and maintenance, which is huge. And you can then reinvest that and start to grow your SRE capability and so on. So it's a focus on that you can then reinvest your budget to upskilling the rest of the team, and then your SRE related successes grow and grow and grow and grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Ron?
Yeah, I think toil it should be seen as a major driver, right? And I think I really like Mark's analogy there. Every standard SRE, as we'd see it, the textbook SRE should have a good nose for it. But I think also there's I guess one of those things that kind of Mark was talking about, but I'll just tap on top of. There's automation tools to kind of that take a reactive approach, right? So you have your scripting, your interpreted scripting, and you can do it with other off-the-shelf tools and commercial offerings, Rundeck and EventBridge and whatever. But there's also a different thing that we have to think about as well is we should always charge the SREs to say hey, how do we not have that problem at all? So a preventive situation. So if we've learned something that it's actually a service that is disruptive, well, let's just fix the service as compared to just keep restarting the service, for example, in an automated way. And it's just one of those mindset things that could take us to the next level of getting rid of toil down, all the way, because it's the minimalistic solution to that problem. So instead of developing a interpreted scripting solution, that'll do something from time to time. Just fix the service. It may just actually take less engineering effort altogether.
Yeah, good answer. I see Mark smiling there.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking, we've had instances like that before, where somebody's come up, there's an error that keeps coming up, so somebody's come up with amazing automation that just goes in and retries the job and blah, 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 and then you think you could have just fixed that in the time you've taken to engineer around the retry. So just fix the problem.
It's interesting on that front. Absolutely, it's good. It's a good chuckle, because what happens is I've also seen situations where people do these fixes, right? That restart services, for example, but they don't put any instrumentation about it, into it, and it's actually the SRE is doing this. And I'm like, hey, you're telling everyone else in the engineering organization to instrument their services, but you're not instrumenting your own hotfix. So we don't know how many times this thing's being called unless we troll through logs or tune our log aggregation to kind of pick that out. So maybe we should kind of how many times is this actually happening a day, right? It's it's a ticking time bomb, right? So there's definitely a bit of a chuckle and inwardly, I guess.
They're always fun when that engineer then leaves and somebody finds it running in the background a year later.
Easter egg. I think they call them Easter eggs, yeah?
Oh, yeah. Easter eggs, yeah. Right, cool. Next question. I'll come to you on this one, Rupert, because you've actually already got involved on the in terms of answering it. So DevOps and financial regulations still need a break between Dev and Ops for PCI compliance. What role bridges that gap?
Yeah, and I am sort of familiar with the question. I wasn't sure exactly what Mark L was kind of getting at here. I mean, there are neutral roles related to requirements approval, code review and stuff like that. There are kind of neutral roles, but really the issue is that you've got someone, I say SREs are developers too, but they're also operational. So what side are they? Are they dev or are they prod? So this is something that we need to understand better. Clearly, in financial services, we need to make sure that regulators understand the way technology is evolving. I'm sure this sort of thing impacts pharmaceuticals as well, and perhaps government agencies, whether they have more restrictions. My comments to date so far was the fact it's a bit far out this, but everybody should be dev side, nobody should be prod side, and that's because we should be able to operate our products entirely through APIs and so on. Now, that is pretty fanciful, I admit. I'm not sure when we would ever get there. But in the meantime, it is simply safer to be dev side. And when you do need those elevated privileges, request them, justify them as simply as possible. And then there's that audit trail, as opposed to the persistent granting of really quite powerful roles, which no wonder a regulator or anyone in the business actually should be very nervous about that, because humans, we make mistakes.
Yeah, that's a good point. You mentioned that you see SREs as developers anyway. Do you think SREs see themselves as developers as well?
Yes, and even those who are more infrastructure engineers, they're still doing some development, some scripting and whatnot, and that should be done within the code base of the underlying product. So the feature developers and the SREs should all be operating within one code base.
Cool.
And using all the developer tool chain.
Yeah, of course. Ron, Mark, anything to add to that?
Just to go to that last point, the dev shoot is like that eating your own dog food thing, isn't it? The DevOps or the SREs should be using the exact same tools as the devs, and their code should live in the same place. There shouldn't be an us and them mentality, because we're all part of the same organization. They're just developers for a different function of it, I guess.
Yeah, so collaboration obviously very important across that team. Ron?
Yeah, I have a bit of a different view. So I think, I see systems engineers, systems admins, infrastructure engineers, and everyone. Nowadays, I see it as more like we should be treating everyone as engineers. And you should be engineering your way out of problems, right? It's not like you come to work and you cookie cutter some code and you go home, right? We genuinely are engineers. So we build the stuff, we own the stuff, we find problems to real world, solutions to real world problems. But I think coming back to Mark Long's or Mark L's question, I think it was Mark Long that asked that question about the regulatory situation. So, within nowadays world, obviously we need to make sure that things are done in an auditable way, right? And with some safety rails, and Rupert touched on this quite well already. But when we stem back and we actually analyze the problem and put our engineering hat on, actually the regulators are after for checks and balances to make sure those safety checks are in place. There's no mention that Sally or Sam have to be the person that actually does that regulatory check. So when you stand back and you look at the problem, you say, well, I'll just automate that as well. Actually, automate it all the way as to what Rupert said, all the way up to production. And if it doesn't work, I'll automate the reverse rollback of that as well. Because at the end of the day, that's the mindset we need to be thinking about. And when it comes even to production, up until like the final kind of push, we start thinking about how can we leverage the technologies that we have today, about gradual release and sampling releases and canary type releases, as well as blue-green type releases, to make sure that the regulators are happy. We're doing things in a safe way. And if our change, well, if it's not good enough to meet the regulatory standards or the high expectations of our customers, we can pull it back really, really quickly at the first 5xx, for example. And it's kind of, you think about it that way. I think the days of, having cabs and 20 non-technical people working alongside 2 or 3 technical people to actually get the job done, I think these days are slowly coming to an end. The truth is we have to anyways, because we need to be more agile. And I think all companies are accepting this now. So they're looking to automate even this process as well. I think that's what Mark L was alluding to. So if he wasn't, I apologize, but I think that's where he was going with that regulatory question.
Can I just jump off the back of that as well? I mean, I think it's compliance as code, isn't it? It just becomes another requirement. It becomes another part of your definition of done, and you write some automated tests against it. And if they fail, it doesn't go to production. Like you say, It's just another problem to engineer your way out of.
Absolutely.
Yeah, good points. Cool. So a question here from Ivan. I think might have sort of touched on this already. How can you describe a DevOps engineer? Is a DevOps engineer just an evolved systems engineer? I think that was Ron. You mentioned something about this earlier. Is that right? Is that how you would describe a DevOps engineer, an involved systems engineer?
So that's a good question. I think I did mention the fact that SREs implement DevOps best practices or DevOps practices and steer with data. But I think from a DevOps engineer, from what I'm seeing in the market nowadays, the theme that's kind of coming out to me is people are getting a bit of there's a bit of confusion between DevOps engineers and infrastructure engineers or platform engineers, I think is the other one that I commonly see.
Yeah.
And when I start to read those job descriptions, and again, they come in different shapes and sizes, but the themes I'm picking out are, you're going to IAC something, you're going to manage an infrastructure of some kind. And I think for some businesses, they may need that level of scrutiny or engineering talent. So there is that. But I think from a DevOps engineer perspective, I typically see DevOps engineer, Terraform, CloudFormation, binding to some, or integrated into some, alert management tools, whether VictorOps or PagerDuty, and then are integrated into, some incident management or event management, change management system, whether it's, whatever one it is, Zendesk or ServiceNow or whatever. And I typically see that underneath that job title. But again, I think I would love to hear what the other two panelists, Rupert and Mark, have to say on the point as well.
Rupert? Sorry, Mark.
No, sorry. On you go, Rupert. I don't want to jump in.
Well, all right. I mean, look, it's part of me doesn't really know what a DevOps engineer is, just because, for me, DevOps is a philosophy. So that's the way I see it. And if I advertise for a DevOps SRE, it's because I'm trying to imply a philosophy, and the applicants generally come back with Docker, Kubernetes, and whatnot. If I just advertise for an SRE, then they're more likely to come back with what I need more often, which is very strong Linux, deep Linux. So, these job titles I find, if anything, confuse not just ourselves, but the job applicants. So you better be pretty clear about the rest of the job title and the job description.
Good point. Yeah, go on, Mark. Sorry.
Yeah, so no, that was one of the main thrusts in my presentation. It's that what as a DevOps engineer, it's depending on what company you work for, it can be 100 different things.
Yeah.
And that is the problem. And a good part of, like you said, an infrastructure engineer, Ron. Sorry, like you said, an infrastructure engineer is, they'll be responsible for a set bit of infrastructure. Whereas I think if you truly want a DevOps engineer, you want them to come in with the DevOps mindset, and they want to come in and try and help change your organization and help bring developers along on the journey as well. So I think, and again, I touched upon it in my presentation, a DevOps engineer should be a transitional thing. It should be getting stuff in place, whether that's culture or tools, to get that in place, and then they go because their job's done, and then your environment set up and your culture set up. But then I guess that's DevOps engineer means so many things to so many people now, so there is no consensus as to what it actually is.
And if at some point we'll drop the DevOps and we'll just be talking about engineers and whatnot, and instead we'll have to advertise sometimes for legacy engineers. Those are engineers who are happy to work in a more bureaucratic, slow-paced environment. And the joke's on us is because they'll probably command very high salaries for being willing to do so.
Yeah, exactly. So do you think then DevOps engineer as a title, Rupert, will diminish eventually?
I think it will fade as we understand how to better describe these roles and make it easier for people to find the roles they're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So back to you, Mark. Got a question here from Cameron. Mark, do you see serverless services impacting DevOps/SRE in any meaningful way?
100% yes, because a lot of what especially DevOps do, as I was saying, is manage that infrastructure. When you move away from infrastructure, and you just move to Lambda functions and things like that, you don't need to. You get away from even all the complexities of Kubernetes, because you're not having to spin up all of this stuff that somebody has to look after. So yeah, serverless is definitely going to change the way it is changing the way this industry works.
Yeah.
And the other interesting thing about serverless is a lot of these things, Lambda functions, for instance, you can assign costs to really easily. So whereas at the moment your infrastructure might just be a big blob that costs you X every month, and you've tried to put some tagging in, and you've tried to put some solutions in to work out where you're spending your money. It's a lot easier when you've got serverless to work out exactly that piece of code is costing me X and it's only bringing in Y benefit. So I need to look at this. So I think that's one of the benefits of serverless is you get away from that thinking about trying to sort of untangle a lot of the money aspect.
Yeah, of course. It makes complete sense. Ron, have you got anything to add on that?
Yeah, I do. I think everything comes at a cost, and I see serverless services as the Ferrari solutions, because like Mark's saying, we don't have to worry about the mundanes and worrying about standing up all of the underlying infrastructure, and we just focus on actually solving the problem at hand and genuinely improving the customer experience. But that does come at a cost, so there's always there's always a decision to be made, like, hey, is it going to be like infrequent load and we don't have to, think about it too much? Then that sounds like it could be a serverless thing that we could look at, regardless of whatever that serverless technology is. But there are instances where, actually, these are pretty hot and heavy kind of, situations where we see a lot of load, and it's just constant. So then we start thinking about other solutions, that could be along the lines of, provisioned, cloud-based solutions, if not, mapped up and married up with, streaming solutions to kind of keep that flow going. So I think, again, it's about using the right tools for the job. But I think, serverless, coming back to serverless, I personally am a big fan of that. I think that's fantastic technology, because all we have to worry about is instrumenting, the actual, the serverless code that's being run. And that makes SRE's job a lot easier. So that means we can actually manage a lot more stuff and actually do it really relatively peacefully, without all of those whiskey and Nurofen moments that come along with, managing that underlying infrastructure. I mean, anyone who's managed anything like, we were mentioning Kate. So when Kate falls over, it's not nice, right? It's a headache. And if someone's going to take up that headache for you for a couple of 0.001 cents of whatever a run, I'm game. Let's talk about it.
Rupert, anything to add on Ron's point there?
Well, in terms of business enablement, this is hugely important. Morgan Stanley is, years ago, we developed our own sort of private cloud, for want of a better word, opportunistic compute, if you will, and the uptake was huge.
Yeah.
The problem with that is that the staff don't necessarily, the SREs, the ops staff and so on, even the developers, they don't have experience of it. So you're dealing with something new and you will likely make mistakes. And you are probably going to end up, well, not doubling up on your tools, but it increases the complexity of the tools available to you. And you need to reimagine your observability and all these sorts of things. So it generates work.
Yeah, of course.
But that's how it impacts, SRE, at least. More work. It's welcome.
Do you see that's the same? I mean, obviously, as a large organisation as Morgan Stanley, I mean, it's huge. Is that why it creates so much work? I mean, Mark, would you see the same with AdStream? Obviously, a smaller company than Morgan Stanley. Do you see it creating more work? Or
I think to the point where you have to get people up to speed. It is a new thing. I think initially, these people are going to have to spend time learning what it is, making the mistakes, being in an environment where they're allowed to do that. And as you say, we're a sort of smaller company. We don't have as many people as Morgan Stanley. We don't have like an R&D division maybe that can go and do this sort of stuff. So it's the uptake you need to get buy-in for people to spend their time on doing this sort of stuff. That's where the work initially is.
Yeah. Okay. But eventually, it's definitely worth it, right?
It looks like it, yeah.
Okay, cool. We've probably got time for maybe 3 or 4 more questions. I don't think we'll get around to all of them because we've got a lot coming in still. So how can SREs get on top of microservice dependency and low-level alert noise? Who wants to come in on that one? Mark?
So
does that make sense, that question? I'm not too
makes,
sure if
I guess so. No, it makes sense to me. So I think
it sounds like two questions to me, really.
Yeah, I was going to talk about alert noise first. Yeah, alert noise is a major problem with anything, especially if you've got a lot of microservices. You want to have actionable alerts. You don't want a screen of Teams notifications telling you something's fallen over. It needs to be something that's actionable. And I think from an SRE point of view, I think it sits more with the development team. They need to be working in that culture where they instrument their code properly, and they only they have these actionable alerts. I think that's one of the key parts of SRE and DevOps. You don't want that noise. You don't want alert fatigue. And then what was the first part of the question again? Sorry.
How can SREs get on top of microservice dependency?
Yeah, I'm not so sure about that one, but again, I see it more as a developer question.
Rupert,
I'd say it sits with them.
The same.
I mean, I can't say I've got huge experience of microservice dependency hell and so on. In a sense, I kind of welcome it when I think about some of our monolithic applications we still have. But there's pluses and minuses, pros and cons. It sounds to me that I'd suggest to John Shaw that you want alert correlation, so that these aren't alerts, but they're simply events, and you are taking a broader look at your events and using some smarts to be able to decide when you need to take action, when you're not. So really, it's a software problem. These alerts, or rather events, I'd rather call them, all relevant. But as individual alerts, then you're doing it wrong. So I need to buy some software. Maybe that's what the models to say. I don't know.
Right, so let's move on to the next question.
Actually, I'd like to jump on that one if you guys don't mind.
Apologies, Ron. Yeah, absolutely.
It's all right. So I think alert noise is quite common, right? I think what happens is someone gets a new tool, they fire it up, and they basically try to jump a mountain, right? Anyone who tries to jump a mountain, it just ends up hurting themselves, right? So the mountain's there. So instead of trying to jump it, just put one step ahead of the other and kind of walk up that mountain peacefully. But what I mean by that is, instead of just turn on the big alert switch and fire up everything, how about just phasing it in? And coming back to the data-driven approach, I mean, you have your SLAs, which are the golden things that you're after. And arguably, you'll have a handful or less SLAs in the business, and probably hundreds of SLIs. So make sure that you focus on implementing the SLIs that are most dear or related to the SLAs, and start with those and start phasing them in. Because what will happen is you'll be in a position where the engineers are learning, and you're also taking care of the event correlation tooling that you're going to most likely have as an SRE, whether that's in ServiceNow or whatever, whatever tool you have, PagerDuty or whatever. They can all do event correlation of some kind. But you're actually helping the tool train itself as well, nice and peacefully. So instead of saying, hey, like tomorrow we're going to have everything, full of alerts, and then you get alert noise and everyone just tunes it out and puts it, creates rules to avoid all that stuff and turns their pager off. Just start off with the most important things first and start to kind of whittle your way down until the point where you actually get all of those thousands of SLIs, alerting. I think that was one question. I think the other one was more interesting. It's around decoupling, tightly coupled microservices, I think is the best way to paraphrase that situation or that question. And there's a couple of ways to do this. There's the simple mindset of, if a microservice is doing more than one thing, then it's doing one thing. And if you need another microservice or another service to be performed, then you should join up with another one. And the way that those are working together is you implement those with very tight pack testing to make sure that those dependencies are not broken. So there's internal contracts from a software perspective between the actual microservices themselves. And this means if you have to fix or do something on microservice A, then you only have to touch that one. You don't have to touch the whole thing. So you've basically avoided right from the get-go that kind of gotcha that everyone seems to fall into from time to time, of building monolithic architectures by bolting on extra things that they can do with one microservice. So it's really something that you want to avoid. And I think the other angle to kind of look at that is if you're finding yourselves in a position where you have microservices that have high dependencies, this is screaming for tracing capability and tooling, so that you can break down exactly what's going on. So you can say like, hey, every time this thing's called, it takes 10 seconds, which is just too long. So what's going on in that 10 seconds? And that sparks that investigation and actually breaking it down. Another good habit of an SRE to kind of break down what's going on in the fat of the land and actually tuning that stuff up to the point where you're like, okay, we've decoupled it into 10 things, and now we can make those things Ferraris in their own right. So I hope I've answered that question for the person who's asked, but I think there's two questions in it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good overview and summary of that. That was from John, and John's actually asked another question here, which I think we've covered already. Should SREs get involved with infrastructure? Jai's actually commented on that, which is a very good point. He said that it's obviously down to, in his experience at least, it's company dependent. So like a smaller startup or a smaller company, perhaps like AdStream, Mark, they might want someone to be more of a generalist, where in a sort of multinational company like Morgan Stanley, then they might look for people who are sort of SMEs in a certain thing. So I think we covered that, to be honest, unless anyone else wants to add anything on that question.
I was just going to say,
get involved with infrastructure. Sorry, Mark.
I was going to say, I guess it's another thing. It depends on where you are in your journey. If you've supplied the tools that enables them to stand up their own infrastructure and sort of destroy it when it's done, then you can give the devs the self-service that they need. But you're right. For smaller companies, you might also have them spinning things up. It just depends on the culture of where you are at that moment.
Yeah, I guess so. Rupert, anything to add on that?
Well, whenever you split the role, you split the focus. You are effectively splitting your investment. That said, it is usually very useful for an SRE to be, to have a handle on the infrastructure, because it forms a crucial part of the reliability. Yeah.
Cool. Ron, I'll better come to you before I move on again, as I skipped over you last time.
That's you owe me a beer for that one, Joe. But when things are safe, I'll take you up on it. But I think Rupert, said some key things there around ownership. I think SREs, the way I see it, is SREs are the guardians of the platform, right? So obviously, if there's an expectation to understand everything end to end, then there's again that build it, you own it kind of approach, right? And I appreciate, like Mark is saying, and rightfully so, that this isn't a catch-all way to do it, right? So there's different businesses and different journeys that we have to take into account. But in a nirvana state, in a purist state from an SRE perspective, absolutely SRE should be all over that, owning it end to end, taking care of the deployments all the way through to end-of-lifing services on that platform.
Yeah, so you want SREs to actively get involved with that, even if it's not part of their actual role. Yeah, cool. Okay, so I think we've got time for maybe 2 more questions. How can I help to introduce SRE culture at my team? Any pro tips? So we've touched on this earlier in terms of how SRE and the business culture matches and lines up. Any pro tips, Rupert, in terms of how you can introduce that culture into the team?
Well, in a perfect world, you have senior sponsorship who is offering you some budget to be able to go and grow this. And even then, it can be difficult explaining the value to the other stakeholders, the dev leads, for example, stuff like that. And actually, that was my experience for one area I look after. There was huge support, enough investment, stuff like that. It was still really difficult. So my pro tip would be basically make a start, show the value in one small way, and anything that you're already doing that's SRE-like, just rebrand it as SRE and start tracking your SRE accomplishments. At some point, people will notice that there is some value in what you're calling SRE, and they'll be more receptive.
good tip. Ron, anything to add on that? Any pro tips?
Yeah, I think Rupert's hit some good points again. And if you find yourself in a position where you're looking for that executive sponsorship, put together a business case. It's quite common, right? And usually it's pretty simple algorithm saying like, hey, this service costs this much to develop. This service breaks this many times. This service costs that many times. That much money to actually fix it. And actually, the MTTR is well over the SLA, and we breach constantly, which means we're actually paying more. So to avoid that pain, let's not do that. And the operating model that we should entertain is site reliability engineering to introduce agility, reliability, and all of that good stuff. I think that's definitely one way to do it. But I do like and do see Rupert's approach being often used. Start small, show what good looks like, and amplify. Right. So be a positive amplification of SRE best practices and implementations. And I've often seen that that may take some time. Again, there's no light switch thing here. But definitely you'll get the results if you start small, and it's easier to have learnings and successes when you're small as compared to large monolithic big bang things and all that.
Yeah, cool. Mark, what's your experience? Do you agree with Rupert?
I mean, I agree pretty much totally. I would say that is the important thing. Start small and then really shout about your successes. You've got to be loud a bit when you're doing well. But I think the other thing is what are you? Why do you want to implement this SRE? What do you think you're going to get out of it? And then the starting point should be the area where you think you'll see the most benefit. And you must have a reason for wanting to move to SREs. So that's it. Just pick the biggest benefit that you see and then shout about it as loud as you can when you've made some success.
Yeah, good points. Very good tips there for Shan, who asked that question. Next question. This one's probably towards Ron. So I think this is a question from LinkedIn, actually, Ron. So is it okay to update SLAs, SLOs, and SLIs? And if so, what frequency would you suggest in terms of updating them?
Yeah, this is a great question. And, nothing set in stone is the answer, right? Things change, businesses change, and you should expect that and actually prepare for it and embrace it. So SLAs arguably will be the slowest things to change. And that to me, makes sense because the blast radius is quite wide. SLIs, on the other hand, will be the most frequent things to change and are absolutely within our gift to control that change and that level of change and the frequency of that change. And the SLOs, the binding link, arguably, that's an interesting thing. So what we often see, and I often experience, is SLOs come in at a minimum standard to meet the SLAs. And then we start to incrementally kind of raise the bar, if that makes sense, to kind of make it so it's a bit harder to achieve, and we have early warning signals to avoid the SLA breaches. So that one is something that changes kind of in line with our journey, so to say, and how we progress. But yeah, expect change. It's what we do in SRE, right?
Rupert, anything to add on that from your point of view?
Yeah, I mean, I think there needs constant tuning. I'm not a big fan of SLAs. I just don't find them useful with vendors, really. There is some expectation setting. Don't tend to use them much internally. But, with SLOs, really what you're saying is how much can the depending party depend upon your system? Are you kind of invested in it to the same degree as they are in their own system? And therefore, as you ramp up, you might tighten your SLOs, but also as you see a system becoming, let's say, deprecated, you should let your SLOs out and show that you're really not going to be jumping on this if there's an issue. So it's quite powerful and therefore definitely worth revisiting regularly.
Anything to add on that?
Nothing much really, other than change is the only constant. You should be revisiting them, especially in the early days, because you want to start small and realistic, and then as you improve, you start tightening it up a bit. So I think, and then again as you were saying, Rupert, at the end of the process, at the end of life, you then start reducing it right down until you prove that it's not really in use anymore. So I think, yeah, initially you'll probably tweak them quite a lot, and then there might be a period of stability, and then towards the end you might sort of tweak them back down again. But constant change.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for that, guys. Just conscious of time now. I think that's probably all we've got time for, unfortunately. There's still a lot of questions that we didn't get around to, unfortunately. But yeah, just conscious of time. So yeah, guys, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been really good. Really enjoyed hearing what everyone's got to say. And yeah, thanks everyone else for tuning in and watching us. If you follow both the Orbis Connect community and Site Reliability London group on Meetup, there's going to be quite a lot of these events going on. I believe we've already got our next SRE event in the pipeline, so make sure you sign up for updates on that. This whole event has actually been recorded. We'll be uploading it to YouTube shortly, plus we'll be sharing presentations and relevant information on the Orbis blog in case you missed anything, and that includes details of all of our guests today, all our panelists. Special thanks, of course, again to Mark, Ron and Rupert for being such a great panel, and to Jai Campbell, again from the Site Reliability London Meetup group, and Cameron as well, who's put all this together. I'm just here as the mediator today. Cameron, one of my colleagues, has put all this together, so thank you for him. Stay safe, everyone. Guys, thank you again. I'll speak to you all soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks,
Thank
Jai.
you, everyone.
Thanks, Cameron.
Cheers.
Bye, guys.
Cheers, guys.